The world's fastest athletes use this one piece of equipment to help push their sprint times as low as possible. It develops not only your speed, but also your technique and even your strength. It is the sled. We're gonna show you the best ways that you can use a sled to improve your speed, and we're gonna start right now. So the first exercise that we're gonna start off with is a real doozy, and it's an interesting one. A lot of people have never even seen this movement, and when we're executing this, I like to think about, are my ankles in a dorsiflex position? Are my hamstrings lengthened, and am I thinking about actually pulling with my hamstrings to a point? If you can't accelerate rapidly, you can't get the top end speed quickly, you probably need to work with sleds. That's where this is gonna be. Most sports operate in that realm of acceleration. I'm gonna be here, a little bit longer limb, okay? I'm gonna have hip flexion. I'm gonna get set. I'm gonna get a little bit of a forward lean. There we go. Okay, and I just wanna go here, boom, 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 boom. Now I get it moving here, and I wanna keep that dorsiflexion, and I wanna pull through my hamstrings and my glutes. And I know this looks very, very odd, very awkward, right? But as you're pulling, and you're flexing here and you're squeezing through your butt here, you will start to feel this. And that's the one big factor with the sled. If we would do this, let's say 5 sets of 20 meters, this would be a really, really good warm up to get the hamstrings active, to get the ankles active, to get that anterior tibialis right here a little bit more active, so that as we're working through acceleration, we bring this here dorsiflex, and then we come down, we ground midfoot and drive forward. The sled work isn't only gonna train the hamstrings and the glutes, it's also gonna train other muscles. So sled work is pretty simple when we think about how it's being done. You're either gonna be facing the sled or you're gonna be facing away from the sled. You're either gonna be pulling it forward, pulling it backward, or pushing it. One of the other big factors is that some of the best sprinters in the history of the world, think about Nesta Carter, Johan Blake, Usain Bolt, all of these animals have worked with sled work. And the reason why they've used sleds is because sleds are related to early acceleration. They're related to how quickly you can come out of the blocks. If you're running a 40, sled work is pivotal for the first 10 to 20 yards. That's gonna be about 80 to 90% of your work. If you have a good 10-yard dash, a good 15, a good 20, that's gonna set you up for the rest of the 40. If you're running the 100 meters, if you're good through 20 to 30 to 40, now all of a sudden that sets you up for that max velocity the rest of the way through. So think about someone like Johan Blake sprinting with this raggedy old sled. We don't always need a 1080 motion. We don't always need a run rocket. Those tools are fantastic, but sled work is absolutely great if we're looking at acceleration, because we have a longer grounding period, and that enables us to recruit at higher speeds then while we're hitting those positions. It also is a great teaching tool for technique. So in all reality, the sled work's gonna come back to the way that we're pushing or pulling the sled, the load on the sled, the distance that we're trying to cover, and then the angles or the pressure that we're trying to teach that athlete regarding technique, strength development, or impulse. So I must ask you a question.
Did I stutter?
Have you ever seen 3 different ways to use a sled in 3 different types of modalities? Now, the first one that I want to show you is going to be based around just learning good mechanics to push. So one way I like to use a sled is to actually use it as a target so I can get my chest through. And if I have the band here around my hips, now I'm starting to feel that tension. If we remember all the way back to the beginning when we did the stiff-legged walks, the really, really weird looking walks, I could feel my glutes. Now, if I get into a situation of acceleration and I want to think about my chest angle along with my shin, okay, I can get here, boom, and I want to feel my glutes and my quads, and notice I'm holding dorsiflexion in my up knee, my knee that's up. We can do 2 different things after this exercise, but first we're gonna get here, boom, 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 and then try to hold here, hold this position. Try and feel that all the way from the Achilles up through the quads into your butt, and hold that chest to project forward. So one aspect too, when we're thinking about acceleration, we have longer grounding periods. Okay, so we have to have that overcoming inertia initially out of the stance, okay, out of the start. As we work through each stride, okay, the first 2 or 3 steps, we will have longer grounding periods. So then in turn, we're able to apply a relatively large amount of force to help us get moving, to help us accelerate. That's why sled pushes can help us quite a bit, especially in sports like wrestling, in sports like football, in sports like rugby. Let's pretend I just hit those banded acceleration switches. I want to focus on my technique. I want to focus on my feeling. I can rest a minute, and then we can get into sled push here, trying to really hit the exact same position. So we go here, boom, 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 boom. Try and drive straight. Don't go off kilter the way I did. Now that's one thing that we can do. Okay, so we hit that. Let's say we do 4 to each side. We rest about a minute to a minute and a half. We come over. We focus on long, driving, heavy sled pushes. The heavy sled pushes are going to help somebody who struggles around that first 10 yards of their sprint or 15 yards of their sprint. If you notice that they're very slow in that early acceleration, then you can use the heavy sleds. Now, if we see that they're slower in later acceleration, think about if around step 6, step 7, step 8, step 9. We're getting closer to 20, 25 yards, something like that. Now we see, well, they're not transitioning really well. They're still a little bit slow in later acceleration. That brings us to the velocity decrement. That's where we can start with putting weight on a sled and saying, okay, let's do sled pulls with about 10% of our body weight. Let's see if we run through a 20 or a 30 in a specific time frame and we put 10% of a weight on our sled, do we decrease by about 20% or 25%? And we can start to analyze what that velocity decrement is around that 10%, and then we can either add load or decrease load based off of how they're actually adapting to that weight that's on the sled when they're doing the sled pulls at higher speeds. Okay, so the heavy sled push is gonna help early acceleration. The lighter sled pull will help in later acceleration. The switches are gonna help with just feeling that right tension. And then finally, I'm adding one more extra aspect here, is that oftentimes if you do a sled push or a sled pull, you will see in an acute setting that after you rest for about a minute and a half to 2 minutes and then you go do an unweighted sprint, you will see as a coach that your athletes are running faster without any weight. They're actually running faster than they otherwise would have. And the reason being is that they're either potentiated, they're learning better mechanics, or they're just feeling quicker as they work through those acceleration phases, that early and late acceleration. So you can use all 3 of these aspects of the sled to then increase in that one specific setting the actual running or sprinting without any weight. I hope that was clear because that was a lot of information.
I don't expect everybody to understand.
Okay, another great exercise, 1 to prime the body, but 2 to get younger athletes to understand positions, to get older athletes to really feel those positions so they transfer really well into acceleration. This is a movement that we covered with Faris Khan as well. This is an exercise known as the sled marches. The big factor here is trying to think about putting force into the ground. So the sled's gonna be a bit heavier, and we wanna think about where our foot positioning is. Mid-foot, don't let the heel drop here. Try to extend all the way through the hip and through the knee. And one big factor too is that if we get used to extending through the knee and through the hip here, now we should ground in a better position. Okay, we'll cover better ground, and then when we're getting through acceleration and we're leaning, that will help our stride. That'll help us get into a better transition long term. So this is what a sled march will look like. It's gonna be a little bit heavier. We're gonna get here, I'm gonna go here, boom, 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 boom. So you wanna apply force into the ground to then get that ground reaction and come back into you, and try to really hold that trunk nice and dynamic and stable. If you have that good trunk control, that's gonna help you accelerate a little bit more effectively. You can use exercises that are a little slower to try and iron out any issues that they might be having. So far, we've talked about pulling and pushing, and the big aspect here is that we've got to think through the lens of how does this transfer to the sports performance world? If we're a field hockey player, does pulling a sled help us? 100%. It's gonna help us get out of cuts a little bit better. It's gonna help us be stronger through our trunk because we have to apply more force in a linear manner through greater expressions of impulse. And when we think about training inside of our strength training app, Peak Strength, one of the days that we've built is entirely based around impulse-based training. Okay, how much force can you apply in a designated period of time? So we're focusing on things like speed production, rate of force development, peak velocity. These are all aspects around the exercise selection that we have in over 40 plus different sports. And so head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store to download Peak Strength today to get those first 5 free workouts so that you can become a freak. Now, let's get back to sledding. In sports like football, and there's other sports, even in tennis, we have to master running backwards, and that can actually change the way our cognition works. And one of the things that we can do is actually have them do velocity decrement by sprinting backwards. So that might look like here, we're getting set. We got about 55 pounds on. I want to make sure I don't have anything behind me, make sure everything's safe, make sure that you have good balance, and we want to get into a flex position in sprint. And I think that you should be timing this to help you actually figure these things out. I'm gonna come back towards the cameraman here, get good balance, boom, 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 boom. And the other big factor with movements like this, when we change our center of mass, that will help with deceleration as well. So even if you're running a shuttle, you will have to change that center of mass to drop it quite a bit. Another factor that I think helps quite a bit with cutting would be using Cariocas, or is it karaoke? Which one is it? And it could be a little bit heavier, but we can start off with just a little march. Here, boom, boom. And just doing this slowly and thinking about driving, boom. That big push, that big drive, you'll feel that more in the glute med, you'll feel that in the quad, and you'll even feel that in your ankle quite a bit. You get more confident with that movement pattern, and then all of a sudden you can use this to drive, and you can think about, again, if you have a tight end or a wide receiver and they're running a specific route, you can teach them where the transfer comes from. So we're here, boom, 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 boom. You can do that 15 to 20 yards to each side. So pushing, pulling backwards, pulling forwards, using all these different aspects of the sled, even using the isometric aspect of the sled to enhance your overall training. That's gonna help with acceleration, that's gonna help you become a freak. Because remember, freaks, if you wanna become a champion, you've always gotta cultivate your power. Peace.